Hello everyone, Andrew Kornfeld here, recording you this video from beautiful Santa Cruz, California, Pleasure Point. I'm about to jump in the water, catch a few of these gorgeous waves that are breaking. It's very low tide, as you can see. Seeing these tadpoles right here, you can see one. Here's a better one over here. You can get a glimpse of what the ocean floor looks like, teeming with life. And you start to appreciate when you look around this landscape here, the people, the rocks, the trees, the ocean. It's hard not to gain an appreciation of the beauty that we can see around us. And what's been on my mind is truly the beauty of the biology of the gut, and just re-examining just the basic biology with a slightly different lens, and considering how this organ that we have inside us, called the human gut, has an incredibly impossible task, okay? This task is to take plants and animals that human beings consume, the natural constituents, carbohydrates, fats, proteins, and to separate out all of those macronutrients and other micronutrients from the things that will literally kill us. At any given time, there are what we would call harmful bacterial organisms. Sometimes they vary per person. That one bacterial species could be very inducing of an adverse reaction or an allergic reaction or an exacerbation of someone's autoimmune condition, whereas that same bacteria could be fine for someone else. Let us think of the gut as an interface between the outside world and what we need to survive from the outside world, and also the outside world that would take advantage of us. And that is why the structure of the gut is highly complex. There are these beautiful cells. In the small intestine, we call them small intestinal enterocytes. In the colon, they are also enterocytes, but we can call them colonocytes. These cells form an interface with the world, each separated by these incredibly beautiful and intricate junctions we call tight junctions. These tight junctions are filled with proteins that are essentially holding these cells airtight to one another. Except, like everything in biology, these tight junctions, these spaces between cells, they must be dynamic, okay, and they must be able to change. And that's simply because cells, a special immune cell called a dendritic cell, literally sticks its tentacles through these tight junctions, and the proteins move out of the way, facilitated by movement proteins of cells, the same cells that move your muscles. These are called actin and myosin. Moving these tight junctions out of the way and letting this dendritic cell essentially sample the lumen of your gut, okay? Even one problematic pathogen, it senses, depending on a given individual's genetics, on their current state of health or disease, the current state of the microbiome, many different factors. Depending on these factors, that one pathogenic organism could even set off a cascade through the biology and signaling and phosphorylations that we see cause an inflammatory response. For example, in inflammatory bowel disease. In fact, when that dendritic cell even goes up to sample, we are now presenting a weakness of our tight junction, given that these proteins have moved out of the way. And in that case, bacterial organisms, food particles, little pieces of virus, different forms of yeast could leak through that barrier. When they leak across from essentially the lumen of the gut, whether it's in the small intestine or the large intestine, into the space between the cells and blood vessels that absorb nutrients called the lamina propria, then this is what sets off inflammation in the gut. Postulated in many different diseases, but most likely confirmed in inflammatory bowel disease that this is the mechanism of action, that these bacterial organisms and food particles are essentially where they are not supposed to be. And this makes sense based off the genetic mutations we see in inflammatory bowel disease. We see genetic mutations in these tight junction proteins that we talked about. So allowing these foreign particles and organisms to slip through and be in the wrong place and cause an immune reaction, which is causing tissue damage, and it's causing continued leakage. And that's why we see inflammatory bowel disease spiral out of control. But when you think of the function of the gut, how it must do this impossible task of sorting through the mess that is the food we eat. It is no wonder that things can go wrong here. The intricate nature of the immune system, where everything has to be just right. The balance of different inflammatory and anti-inflammatory cytokines. For example, let's remember we always hear about TNF, or maybe if you're on Stelara, IL-12 and IL-23. But, one thing we don't hear about often is IL-10, which happens to be an anti-inflammatory cytokine. And again, people with inflammatory bowel disease may have genetic mutations in IL-10. What I am trying to say is that it's important to study the structure and function of the gut. It's important to think about your own condition in the context of how things are working in the biology, and then to essentially take an approach that is able to match that biology. You cannot hope for a single drug or a single magical supplement or a single cookie-cutter dietary strategy or mindfulness practice alone to work. You must find the pattern of interventions that is going to work for you. Given the sheer complexity and beauty and mechanisms by which there is a act of inflammation in the gut, especially in terms of inflammatory bowel disease. The gut must have an incredible immune system. It must have an incredible nervous system known as the enteric nervous system. And then we see the connections on a slightly more macro scale here throughout the body. The connection of the gut to the brain through the microbiome axis. The connection of the gut with the entire immune system and the entire inflammatory response of the body. Let us be kind to our guts. Let us be kind to this organ. Let us listen to our guts, as they may say. One way to listen is to understand. Read a book. Talk to your doctor. or give us a call. We'd love to teach you more about inflammatory bowel disease. We'd love to learn with you and teach you more about the gut and really help you take control of your health. I'm going to sign off and I'm going to jump in the water. Thanks for listening.